She stepped into a struggling small-town diner, and what happened next left everyone in tears. Karoline Leavitt's spontaneous act of kindness is going viral for all the right reasons. Karoline Leavitt hadn't planned to stop in Millfield that afternoon. The small New Hampshire town wasn't on her itinerary, but a detour caused by roadwork on Route 16 had led her down Millfield's quiet main street. Rain tapped steadily against her windshield as she drove past weathered storefronts and century-old brick buildings that had seen better days. She was exhausted after 3 back-to-back meetings and still had a 2-hour drive ahead. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since breakfast. That's when she spotted it. Millie's Diner, a modest establishment with a flickering neon open sign and windows that glowed warmly against the gray afternoon. On impulse, she pulled into one of the few empty parking spots out front and turned off the engine. Inside, Millie's was exactly what you'd expect from a small-town diner that had weathered decades of economic ups and downs. Vinyl booths lined the walls, their red upholstery patched in places but clean. The air smelled of fresh coffee and homemade pie. A handful of customers sat scattered throughout, an elderly couple sharing a slice of something that looked like apple pie, a mother with 2 well-behaved children coloring paper placemats, and a few solo diners hunched over steaming mugs at the counter. As Karoline closed the door behind her, the little bell above it jingled, and several pairs of eyes glanced her way. There was a moment of recognition in some of them, a slight widening, a double take. She was used to it by now, especially in New Hampshire where voters took their civic duty seriously and made a point to know their representatives. A waitress in her 60s approached, wiping her hands on a well-worn apron. Her name tag read Eleanor, and her face showed a lifetime of both smiles and worries. "Sit anywhere you'd like, hun," she said with a gentle smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. Karoline chose a booth near the back, away from the windows. She wasn't hiding. She never hid from constituents. But sometimes it was nice to just be a person rather than a political figure. She barely had time to settle in before Eleanor appeared with a steaming mug of coffee. "Didn't ask if you wanted any," Eleanor admitted with a wink, "but you look like you could use it. Been one of those days?" Karoline let out a small laugh. "Is it that obvious?" "Honey, I've been serving folks in this diner for 37 years. You learn to read faces." Eleanor set down the mug and pulled out her order pad. "What can I get you?" "What's good here?" "Everything," Eleanor replied without hesitation, then smiled. "But our meatloaf is what people drive out of their way for. My mother's recipe. Comes with mashed potatoes, gravy, and fresh green beans from my brother's farm." "Sold," Karoline said, handing back the menu she hadn't even opened. As Eleanor walked away, Karoline noticed the elderly man from the couple at the window booth making his way toward her. His steps were slow but determined, supported by a wooden cane that had been polished smooth by years of use. His wife watched anxiously from their table. The man stopped at Karoline's booth, studying her face. "You're that Leavitt girl, aren't you? The one who works in politics?" Karoline smiled. "Yes, sir, Karoline Leavitt." He nodded. "Thought so. My Martha wasn't sure, but I told her it was you." He hesitated, shifting his weight slightly. "Don't mean to bother you during your meal, but I wanted to thank you personally." This caught Karoline by surprise. In the current political climate, being approached in public could go either way. "Thank me? For what, sir?" "Name's Henry. Henry Wilkins. My grandson, Tommy, was having trouble with his veterans' benefits. Paperwork nightmare, it was. Someone at your office, a nice young man named David, sorted it all out. Spent hours on it." Henry's eyes glistened slightly. "Tommy did 2 tours in Afghanistan. Came back different. That money means he can finally get the help he needs." Karoline felt something tighten in her chest. She remembered the case. David had indeed gone above and beyond, making dozens of calls and navigating bureaucratic mazes for weeks to resolve it. It was exactly the kind of constituent service her office prided itself on, regardless of political affiliation. "I'm so glad we could help, Mr. Wilkins. How is Tommy doing now?" The question seemed to surprise Henry, as if he hadn't expected genuine interest. "Better. Started a program last month. Talks more now. Even smiled at his mother's birthday dinner." He paused. "Politicians don't usually remember the little folks once the election's over. Before Karoline could respond, the bell above the door jingled again. A young woman hurried in, shaking the rain from her umbrella. She wore a waitress uniform and looked distressed. "I'm so sorry, Ellie," she called to Eleanor. "The babysitter canceled last minute, and I had to find someone else. I know I'm late." "Fourth time this month, Jenny," Eleanor replied, her voice gentle but strained. "I've covered for you, but Bob's about at his limit." From the kitchen, a man's voice called out, "We can't keep doing this, Jenny. I'm running a business here." Jenny's face crumpled. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear with trembling fingers. "I know. I'm trying. I am. It's just, since Mark left, it's been so hard with the kids and nothing." The man, presumably Bob, emerged from the kitchen wiping his hands on a towel. He was in his 50s with deep lines around his eyes and a worn expression. "I feel for you, I do. But I need reliable staff. The dinner rush starts in an hour." The diner had gone uncomfortably quiet. Everyone was trying not to stare, but the tension was impossible to ignore. Jenny stood frozen, looking like she might burst into tears at any moment. Karoline watched the scene unfold, feeling the weight of it. This wasn't a political moment. There were no cameras, no reporters, and no social media to capture what happened next. Just real people with real struggles in a small-town diner on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. What she did next would change not just Jenny's day, but the course of many lives in Millfield. It wasn't calculated, it wasn't for show, and that's precisely why it would soon touch hearts across America. Karoline slid out of her booth and approached the counter where Jenny stood, shoulders hunched, trying to hold herself together. "Excuse me," Karoline said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. Bob with surprise, Eleanor with curiosity, and Jenny with confusion through tear-filled eyes. "I couldn't help overhearing. I know this isn't my business, but sometimes an outside perspective can help." Bob crossed his arms. "With all due respect, Miss Leavitt, you're right. It isn't your business." Karoline nodded. "Fair enough. But before you make any decisions, may I ask a few questions?" Bob hesitated, then shrugged. "I suppose. How long has Jenny worked here?" 6 years, Eleanor answered when Bob didn't immediately respond. "Started right out of high school." "And before these recent issues with childcare?" Eleanor glanced at Bob, then back to Karoline. "One of our best. Never missed a shift, always picked up extras when needed." Jenny wiped at her eyes. "I'm trying, Bob. You know I am. But with Mark gone and the childcare costs doubling—" "I know, Jenny," Bob sighed, his stern facade cracking slightly. "But I've got to keep this place running. We're barely staying afloat as it is." And there it was. The real issue is beneath the surface. Karoline glanced around the diner, noticing details she'd missed earlier: the slight discoloration on the ceiling from an old water leak, the outdated cash register, the specials board with prices that seemed remarkably low for current economic conditions. "Bob," Karoline said gently, "is Millie's in financial trouble?" The question hung in the air. Bob's jaw tightened, and for a moment he looked as if he might ask her to leave. Then his shoulders sagged. 37 years, he said quietly. "My parents opened this place in 1986, named it after my mother. We've weathered recessions, road construction that cut us off for months, big chains opening up on the highway. But this past year—" He shook his head. "Costs keep rising. Food prices, utilities, insurance. I can barely make payroll." Several patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was news to them. "Bob's been covering our health care," Eleanor added softly, "even though the policy doesn't require it for part-timers." "Can't let people go without," Bob muttered, looking embarrassed. "Not when they've given years to this place." Karoline felt something stir inside her, not the calculated political instinct she'd developed over years in public service, but something more fundamental, more human. "What if there's another way?" she suggested. "A way that keeps Jenny employed and helps Millie stay afloat." All eyes were on her now, not as a political figure, but as someone offering hope where there seemed to be none. "I'm listening," Bob said cautiously. Karoline turned to Jenny. "How many children do you have?" 3, ages 7, 5, and 2. "And you're not the only one struggling with childcare costs in Millfield, I imagine?" Jenny shook her head. Half the mothers I know are in the same boat, especially since the Little Sprouts daycare closed last year. Now everyone has to drive to Riverdale if they can get a spot at all. The waiting lists are months long. Karoline nodded, pieces falling into place. Bob, what about that storage room in the back? The one through those doors. She pointed to a doorway behind the counter. Bob frowned. What about it? How big is it? About 400 square feet. Used to be a private dining room decades ago before my time. Now it just holds extra supplies, some old furniture. Could it be converted back to its original purpose? Bob's frown deepened. I suppose, but why would I? We barely fill the main dining room most days. Not for dining, Karoline explained, her idea taking shape as she spoke. For a small, co-op-style childcare center. Just for the children of your employees at first, then maybe expanded to include a few other local working parents. The diner fell completely silent. A daycare? Here? Bob looked bewildered. I don't know the first thing about running a daycare. You wouldn't run it, Karoline clarified. It would be a separate entity that happens to share your space. There are grants available for rural childcare initiatives. I've worked with communities to secure funding for similar programs. Jenny's eyes widened. You mean, I could bring my kids here, while I work? That's exactly what I mean, Karoline confirmed. You'd need proper licensing, of course, and someone qualified to oversee the children, but with the right structure, it could work. But the startup costs, Bob protested, though Karoline could see a spark of interest in his eyes. And the liability insurance alone would be manageable with the right partners, Karoline interjected. She pulled out her phone. If you're interested, I can make a few calls right now. I know people who specialize in exactly this kind of community solution. Eleanor looked between Bob and Karoline. Bob, remember how your mother always wanted to do something for the young families in town? She'd have loved this idea. Bob ran a hand through his thinning hair, thinking. It sounds nice in theory, but in practice, it could save this diner, Karoline said quietly. Think about it. Parents dropping off kids would mean new customers. A dedicated space that brings the community together becomes a destination, and employees like Jenny can work reliably without the constant childcare emergencies. The elderly man, Henry, who had returned to his seat during the exchange, spoke up. Martha and I would volunteer a few hours a week. We raised 4 of our own and 7 grandkids. We know our way around little ones. His wife nodded enthusiastically. It would give us something meaningful to do. The doctor keeps telling Henry he needs more purpose in his retirement. Suddenly, others were chiming in. The mother of the 2 children mentioned she was a certified early childhood educator before moving to Millfield. A man in the corner booth revealed he worked in insurance and could help navigate those waters. Another customer offered carpentry skills to help convert the space. In 20 minutes, what had begun as a simple intervention to help a struggling waitress had transformed into something much larger. Karoline watched in quiet amazement as the diner, moments ago a place of tension and despair, buzzed with energy and possibility. Jenny stood beside Bob, hesitant hope in her eyes. Could this work? Bob looked around at his diner, at the community that had gathered within its walls, and something in his expression shifted. Maybe, he said, and for the first time Karoline saw the glimmer of a smile. Just maybe. What happened next would turn Millie's diner into not just the heart of Millfield, but a model for struggling small towns across America. 3 weeks later, Karoline's car once again pulled into the parking lot of Millie's diner. This time, there wasn't a single space to be found. She had to park across the street, next to a freshly painted sign that read Millfield Community Child Care Co-op, with an arrow pointing toward Millie's. The transformation was evident before she even stepped inside. The diner's exterior had been power washed, its faded sign repainted in cheerful colors. Window boxes overflowing with flowers brightened the facade. A small playground had been constructed in what was previously an unused side lot. When Karoline pushed open the door, the jingling bell was nearly drowned out by the bustling activity inside. Every booth and table was filled. The counter seats were occupied by a mix of regulars and new faces. The air hummed with conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter. Eleanor spotted her first, rushing over with a wide smile. "You came back," she exclaimed, pulling Karoline into an unexpected hug. "We were hoping you would. Bob's going to be thrilled." "I had to see how everything turned out," Karoline replied, returning the hug. "It looks like things are going well?" "Well," Eleanor laughed. "Honey, you have no idea. Come, let me show you." She led Karoline through the diner, which somehow seemed brighter than before. New curtains hung in the windows, and the booths had been reupholstered. Fresh paint covered the walls, and the ceiling stain was gone. But the most striking change wasn't physical. It was the energy of the place. Eleanor guided her past the counter to the doorway that had previously led to the storage room. "Ta-da!" she announced proudly, gesturing for Karoline to look inside. The transformation of the space was remarkable. Gone were the dusty boxes and forgotten furniture. In their place was a cheerful, well-organized childcare area. Low bookshelves lined one wall, filled with colorful children's books. A reading nook with cushions occupied one corner, while a small art station took up another. In the center, a group of children sat in a circle as an older woman, Martha, Karoline recognized, read them a story. "We've got 12 children enrolled already," Eleanor explained. 3 are Jenny's, of course. The rest belong to other local working parents. We're licensed for up to 15, but Bob's already talking about expanding into the unit next door if we can get the funding. "That's incredible," Karoline said, genuinely amazed at how quickly it had all come together. "How did you manage it so fast?" "Once word got out what we were trying to do, it was like the whole town rallied," Eleanor explained. "The hardware store donated paint. The Carpenters Union sent people on weekends. The community college's early childhood education program helped design the space and implement a curriculum." She lowered her voice. "And those grants you pointed us toward?" "Game changers." A familiar voice called from behind them. "I thought I heard you'd return to the scene of the miracle." Karoline turned to find Bob approaching, wearing a clean apron and a smile that transformed his entire face. Gone was the stressed, defeated man she'd met 3 weeks ago. In his place stood someone energized and hopeful. "Bob, everything looks amazing," Karoline said, extending her hand. He bypassed the handshake entirely and pulled her into a bear hug. "Amazing doesn't cover it. You saved my business, Miss Leavitt. Probably saved my health, too, given the stress I was under." "I didn't do much," Karoline protested when he released her. "Just connected a few dots. You and the community did all the real work." "Humble, too," Bob chuckled. "Come on, your booth is waiting, and lunch is on the house. Always will be, as far as I'm concerned." Karoline followed him to a booth in the corner, the same one she'd occupied on her first visit. This time, however, a small plaque had been affixed to the wall beside it. It read simply, "Where Ideas Become Community, KL, 2023. "You didn't have to do that," she said, feeling genuinely touched. "Sure we did," Bob replied. "Some things deserve to be remembered." As she settled into the booth, Jenny appeared, now wearing an assistant manager's name tag alongside her waitress pin. "I heard you were back," she said, her entire demeanor transformed from their first meeting. Gone was the desperate, fearful young mother. In her place stood a confident woman with purpose in her stride. "I wanted to thank you personally, not just for saving my job, but for everything else, too." "Everything else?" Karoline asked. Jenny gestured toward the childcare room. "My kids are thriving. They love being here while I work, and Bob's been teaching me the business side of running the diner. Says I've got a knack for it." She smiled. "I'm taking online business classes now. Never thought I'd have that opportunity." Before Karoline could respond, Henry and Martha appeared at the booth, followed by several other community members she recognized from her previous visit. Soon, the booth and surrounding area were crowded with people, all eager to share their stories of how the changes at Millie's had affected them. The mother who'd mentioned her early childhood education background now directed the child care program. The insurance man had not only helped with the diner's policies, but had connected several uninsured families with affordable health care options. The carpenter had found steady work helping other businesses in town with renovations, inspired by Millie's revival. As Karoline listened to their stories, she realized something profound was happening in Millfield. What had begun as a simple intervention to save one woman's job had catalyzed a community-wide renewal. "The most amazing part," Bob said, refilling Karoline's coffee cup, is that it's spreading. 2 other towns have sent representatives to see what we've done here. They want to try something similar." Eleanor nodded. "The Regional Economic Development Council is using us as a case study for rural revitalization. They're calling it the Millfield Model." Karoline looked around at the faces gathered near her booth, people who weeks ago had been strangers to each other despite living in the same small town. Now they share purpose, connection, and hope. "This isn't about me," she said softly. "This is about all of you recognizing what was possible when you came together." Henry shook his head. "Don't sell yourself short, young lady. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to step up, to see possibilities where others see problems. You were that person for Millfield." As the afternoon wore on, Karoline witnessed firsthand how Millie's had become more than just a diner. It had transformed into the beating heart of a community that had found its pulse again. As she prepared to leave, declining numerous offers to stay for dinner, she realized that what had happened in Millfield wasn't just a story about economic revival. It was about something far more fundamental to the American spirit: the power of community, compassion, and collective action to create meaningful change. What she couldn't have known then was how far the ripples from that rainy afternoon would eventually spread. 6 months later, Karoline stood before a much larger audience at a national conference on rural economic development. On the screen behind her was a photograph of Millie's diner, bustling with activity. What happened in Millfield wasn't unique, she explained to the rapt audience of policymakers, business leaders, and community organizers. The challenges they faced: economic decline, lack of childcare, struggling small businesses, these are issues affecting thousands of communities across America. She clicked to the next slide, showing a map dotted with pins representing towns that had adopted variations of the Millfield model. What was unique was how they responded, not with resignation or division, but with creativity and collaboration. They didn't wait for top-down solutions. They created their own, tailored to their specific needs and resources. In the months since her impromptu visit to Millie's, Karoline had watched in amazement as the concept spread organically. What began as a simple solution to one diner's staffing problem had evolved into a movement. The core idea, repurposing underutilized business space for affordable childcare, was elegantly simple, yet transformative. But it wasn't just about childcare. That was merely the catalyst. The real magic was in how it brought communities together, creating ecosystems of mutual support that revitalized struggling towns. In Clarksdale, Mississippi, Karoline continued, a hardware store converted its underused garden center into a childcare space during winter months. In Lakeville, Minnesota, 3 downtown businesses collaborated to create a shared facility. In Tucumcari, New Mexico, a former bank building now hosts a combination of childcare, senior services, and a community kitchen. She paused, looking out at the audience. These aren't just heartwarming stories. They represent a fundamental rethinking of how we approach community development. Instead of treating economic growth, childcare, small business support, and worker retention as separate issues requiring separate solutions, these communities recognize them as interconnected pieces of the same puzzle. After her presentation, Karoline was approached by dozens of attendees eager to learn more. Among them was Jenny, now officially the assistant manager of Millie's and the coordinator of their expanded childcare program, which had indeed grown to include the neighboring storefront. "I almost didn't come," Jenny admitted as they found a quiet corner to catch up. "Public speaking isn't exactly my thing, but Bob insisted, said my perspective matters." "He's right," Karoline assured her. "You lived this experience from all sides, as a working parent, as an employee, and now as part of management. That's invaluable insight." Jenny smiled, confidence evident in her posture that hadn't been there during their first meeting. "My oldest asked me something interesting last night. She wanted to know if I was happy with my job." Jenny's eyes grew misty. 6 months ago, I would have said I was grateful to have any job at all. But now, I told her the truth, that I love what I do, that it matters, that I'm building something important. Their conversation was interrupted by a tap on Karoline's shoulder. She turned to find a congressional representative from a Midwestern state. "Ms. Leavitt, I've been following the Millfield initiative with great interest," the representative said. "My district has similar challenges. I'd like to discuss potentially crafting legislation that could support and scale this model nationally." Before Karoline could respond, another voice joined in. A foundation director interested in funding pilot programs in Appalachia. Then a mayor from a small coastal town asked about adaptations for seasonal economies. Soon, a small crowd had gathered, all sharing ideas, challenges, and possibilities. Standing slightly apart, watching this impromptu collaboration unfold, Karoline felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about politics or partisanship. It transcended the usual divisions. It was about recognizing that sometimes the most powerful solutions are the simplest, human beings coming together to support one another. Later that evening, as the conference wound down, Karoline found herself sitting alone in the hotel restaurant, reflecting on the journey that had begun with an unplanned detour on a rainy afternoon. Her phone buzzed with a message from Bob, a photo of Millie at dinner rush, every table full with a line out the door. The caption read simply, "This is what hope looks like." As she scrolled through her emails one last time before calling it a night, Karoline noticed a message from an unfamiliar address with the subject line, "Thank you for saving my mommy's smile." Intrigued, she opened it to find a colorful digital drawing created by a child, showing a diner with happy faces inside and a rainbow overhead. The message, clearly typed with adult help, read, "Dear Ms. Leavitt, my name is Sophie. I am 7 years old. My mommy is Jenny." Before the special room at Millie's, Mommy was always tired and worried. Now she smiles a lot and reads me stories when we get home because she's not too tired anymore. The other kids at Millie's are my friends now. My teacher says one person can change everything if they care enough. Thank you for caring about my mommy in Millfield. Love, Sophie. Karoline felt tears well in her eyes as she ran her fingers over the screen, tracing the childish drawing. This was why she had entered public service in the first place. Not for power or position, but for precisely this kind of impact. One life at a time, one community at a time. As she prepared to share Sophie's message at the conference's closing session the next day, Karoline reflected on the greatest lesson from Millfield. In a world that often seems impossibly divided, the most powerful force for change isn't found in grand political gestures or ideological battles. It's found in simple human connection, in seeing another person struggle and saying, "What if there's another way?" That question asked in a small-town diner on a rainy afternoon had started a movement that was changing lives across America. Not through conflict or division, but through compassion, creativity, and the recognition that our greatest strength has always been each other. As Karoline would tell the audience the next day, the story of Millfield isn't finished. In many ways, it's just beginning. And if there's one thing I've learned from this journey, it's that the most powerful changes often start in the most unexpected places, like a conversation in a diner where someone chose to listen instead of walk away. If you've stayed with me through this story, I have one question for you. What unexpected place in your community holds the potential for transformation? What problem might have a solution hiding in plain sight? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your idea could be the spark that ignites the next Millfield. And if this story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that one person truly can make a difference. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest journeys begin with an unplanned detour.